Hello and welcome to the Leader in Us podcast. Today we're very lucky to be joined by the Vice Chancellor of UniSA, Professor David Lloyd. So thank you so much, David, for joining us today. My name's Sophie. I'm a PhD student here at UniSA and my PhD is in public health. And I'll pass over to Carly, my co-host, to introduce herself.
Thank you very much. I'm Carly, a Project Support Officer at the Student Life team, part of SEU, and very excited to be here. I'll pass it on over to our lovely guest.
I'm the lovely guest. I'm David Lloyd on the VC.
Nice.
Hi. So perhaps to start off, David, could you please tell us a bit about your leadership journey and how you came into your current role as being the Vice Chancellor here at UniSA?
Okay. So I did a PhD in medicinal chemistry in Ireland, right? So the accent gives that away. And then I did a postdoc in Trinity College in Dublin. And when I was in Trinity, I was offered a lectureship, but I chose to go to industry because the area I was working in, which was molecular modelling and drug design, was kind of new. And there weren't that many experts in Ireland, and there were lots in Cambridge. So I went to Cambridge and I worked in a company in Cambridge, and they were great people. I had a family in Cambridge, got married and had a family, and Trinity kind of kept at me to come back. So I came back to Trinity in 2004. And this is a really long story, I'm sorry, right?
No, that's fine.
So I'm I was a level B research focused lecturer. I was the Hitachi lecturer in advanced computing. That was the job. And I had a lab I was building up, and I was kind of doing my researchy thing. And then one day a guy asked me to go to a meeting about a national initiative that was being framed, because I had industry experience. And I went to that meeting, and in the course of the meeting I realised that there are 7 universities in the Republic of Ireland, or there were at that time, and 5 of them wanted to do something, and I thought what they wanted to do was probably not the most rational thing in the world. But I was a lecturer, right? I'm in a lecture level B, and everybody else in the room was a deputy vice chancellor, right? But I still thought what they were going to do was wrong. And I said to the guy beside me, I think this is nuts. I mean, if we should probably do something else. And the chap beside me afterwards said, yeah, I think you're right. And then we wrote a competing bid against the other 5 universities, and we won. And it was a grant. It was a huge grant to establish this big national institute. And then the president of the uni rang me and said, oh, done pretty well on that grant. And I said, yeah. He says, do you want to do more in that industry space? And so he made me, they created a job. They created this job, which was the Associate Dean Research, and had brackets, Innovation and Intellectual Property. And it was like a senior management role, right? The Dean equivalent in Trinity is the same as the DVC here. So I was like for all intents and purposes, they made me the PVC for innovation. And I wasn't expecting it. So it happened by accident. But then I was reasonably good at it. And then they made me the DVC Research. And I was on the senior management team at the uni. And at this stage, I got the dean's job, the associate dean job, when I was 31, right? So it was early. And then I remember the president, John Hegarty, saying to me, you're going to have to choose. This is kind of a real career path choice, because you've got a good academic career ahead of you if you go down one road, and you've got this great administrative career if you go down the other. And like a dope, I said, I can do both. And so as DVC, I kept my research group going. I kept my PhDs and publications up. And it was, it's hard to run a group and be a full-time academic administrator as well. And then I'd been the head of research for, 5 years at that stage. So 7 years totally in the gig. And I said to the new president who'd come in at that stage, I want to go over to the administration, professional side of the house, because I've kind of done the academic thing. So I became the bursar of Trinity College. And the bursar is at that stage, it was a 400-year-old job title. And it had kind of fallen out of use. But essentially, it's the chief academic administrator of the university. And I took that gig on because I figured we needed to kind of overhaul how we were doing things. And I started to do a kind of a reform program for the administration. Now, in parallel to all of that, I told you this is a long answer, right? In parallel to all of that, a role had come up in an Irish university. They were looking for a president. And I was still pretty young at this stage. And I'd been engaged and encouraged to go for the job. So I went for the job. And I was deemed appointable but not preferred. And that happens to people. People need to get used to that. That happens to you in your career a lot. You can be over the bar, but there's somebody better than you. But I knew I was over the bar. And then I got a call one night when I was working to ask me, was I interested in pursuing the presidency of a university in South Australia, in Adelaide. And I'd heard of Adelaide because of the Grand Prix, right? So I knew about it. And when I looked at UniSA, it reminded me of where I went to uni, which is Dublin City University. And so I said, yeah, I'll have a look at that. And then the rest is history. Here I am, 13 years later, still doing it.
Amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
But I think it comes down to being open. And I say it in the graduation speech, it's being open to saying yes if somebody offers you an opportunity. If you think you can do it and you actually, back yourself in and you're given the opportunity, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good point. I didn't know you were a scientist.
Yeah, lapsed.
That's crazy.
Nah.
No, it's not crazy. Sorry, I don't
You
know.
do know about my Star Trek background, right?
On that topic, if your career at UniSA were a Star Trek episode, what would be its title? And what would be the core moral of the story?
That's a really good question. That's a difficult question, right? So it says, is it original series? Is it the movies? Is it the reboot? Is it the
It's
next
the original
generation?
series.
The best title from the original series, which would apply to life in UniSA, is Amok Time, right? And that's when they all kind of get infected with a mad virus and they all go a bit crazy, right? And all sorts of things happen. People behave in unusual ways. And the moral of the story is you can do your gig and not take yourself too seriously. That's not a bad answer.
I love that.
Yeah. Have your views on leadership changed over the course of your career? And if so, how have they changed?
When I got the job, I remember talking to people because I was very young and I hadn't been a CEO. And I remember talking to people who I kind of admired and who I'd hold up as role models and asking them, have they any advice? And my kind of closest mentoring role model said to me, his advice was, don't interfere, right? I remember thinking, that's not going to work, right? And I don't think I've changed in my approach. I do tend to let people have the space to do the things that they're being paid to do and empowered to do. I think it's really important to not micromanage the delivery. I like to be very clear on what the outcome is, but I'm quite relaxed about how they get to the outcome. So I don't prescribe a path. If we say we're going to be the University of Enterprise, I define what that looks like, and then people get to it the way they get to it, right? And you can measure it in a certain number of ways, and we'll know we're successful when you've got good industry engagement and students getting jobs and that. But you give people the space to create the solution to get to the end point. And I haven't really changed on that. I think I probably with the merger, I'm probably the patience is a bit shorter in terms of because we don't have as much time or the luxury of time to entertain 1,000 ways of doing something. Sometimes you just need to cut through. So I've probably got a little bit more cut through than I had when I started. I was more tolerant of meandering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do you believe the most important skills and characteristics of a good leader are?
This is a personal view, right? I think you need to be able to interrogate a problem from more than one perspective, right? I think that's really important. And it's not about projecting yourself into the consequences of the other person's shoes when the decision is made, right? It's about the perspective of all, because like some things are very black and white, right? But there's an awful lot of grey in leadership. And you can it's good to triangulate just where people are on something. But then I think the most important role of a leader, in my view, is to make a decision, right? And my experience has been that, fortunately, blessed to be working in a job where they're not life and death decisions, right? It's not like we're not on a battlefield. We're not doing open heart surgery. We're trying to make a place better, right? But you do need to make a decision because the absence of a decision is just kind of it's purgatory for everybody. But prevarication is not leadership, right? So I think that when you've done your triangulation and you make an informed, evidence-based decision, and don't be afraid to change your mind if you got it wrong, right? I mean, like the notion that you just prosecute doing the thing you've decided to do, even in the face of the evidence that says it's the wrong thing to do. So I'm amazed when I see people doing that, right? Like just throwing good money after bad, or just doing something which is just so orthogonal to where they should be, even though all the evidence is saying they shouldn't do it. So make a decision, back yourself in, and don't be afraid to change your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you got any suggestions or tips of how UniSA students could strive to develop those leadership skills?
One of the things, when I look at UniSA students, I'm always surprised by how much they have going on outside the classroom, right? And typically people are working part-time, or they're volunteering, or they're engaged in doing something in the uni as well, right? And in leading groups plus societies. And I think that's a really helpful way of developing your skills as a human being, right? But also, I mean, I think a lot of leadership has got to do with dealing with people, right? And you could be a dictatorial leader, right? Where you say you lay down a lot. It probably doesn't get you that far in this day and age. Some people do, but it doesn't. It's not a very enjoyable pastime. So I think connecting with people is a really important thing, and the way to do that is to actually have those human connections in workplaces, in clubs and socks, just even volunteering. It just gives you a more rounded character, which you can then carry into any situation, right? I think people skills are really important.
I'll just jump in here quick, because that made me think of that, how leadership is part of a collaborative process always. What was UniJam like?
Which one? We did it twice. So the first UniJam was 2013, and this is where actually another good character. I don't know if it's a good. It's an interesting characteristic to have as an emergent leader, which is enough naivety to try things that people haven't done before, right? Even if everybody's kind of going, are you sure, right? Because if you have made a mistake, you can change your mind, right? But a million years ago, when I was in Trinity as a researcher, I actually had a really good research collaboration with IBM in the US. And I used to go to California for a couple of weeks, which is, such a trial, to go to Almaden, which is down near San Jose, which is where the research labs are. And we were working with a group who were doing algorithms and stuff that we wanted to use in drug discovery. But IBM had developed this collaborative technology. They called it Innovation Jam technology. And they were using it, and they had tens of thousands of employees globally. And they were in different time zones and different organizational structures. But they were using tech to have these big collaborative conversations. And they used it to source ideas for product lines in IBM in terms of things that they should do next. And it was literally the wisdom of crowds. And they had a technology that allowed you to tap in. And the really smart bit about it was you could upvote things. So I mean, we're used to all these things now. Right? In 2013, this is like magic, right? So number one, you could connect all these people. So you were creating kind of like a social network in an organization. Then you could have these conversations, which were sort of like blog threads, but then people could amplify the ideas. And as they got lots of likes, they became very visible and they could get reinforced. So it was a very structured kind of thing. And I always wanted to try it, right? So they'd only used it. IBM had used it. The United Nations had used it for something. I think the city of Zurich had used it for city planning or something. Like there was a kind of a higher an echelon of society that had made use of this thing, and no university had. And I knew I was coming here, and I knew that at some point I'd have to kind of dust off a strategic plan. I thought, well, the institution knows itself better than I'll know them, so let's go in and have that conversation. And the jam itself, I knew kind of roughly the structure that I wanted to get for the plan. There were 7 themes that I had in mind that the uni would, if it went through these processes, it would be on that evolution towards the University of Enterprise. The jam then became these. We blocked it out like a telethon, because it was going to run for up to 48 hours continually, and we would have. Like across between a telethon or a music festival, there'd be a headline act every 4 hours or so, who'd be a big draw card who'd talk about something globally that would then get people to think locally about how they're going to do it. So we had like the head of NASA, we had the president of Stanford, we had Bob Hawke, we had people like that came on who engaged in a way that, you wouldn't get to talk to them normally, but you could have a conversation with them in this environment, and it was flat. So whoever was in could talk. So if you're like a student or a professor or a DVC, your question had equal weight because it just came up and people answered whatever they were going to answer. So it flattened the organisation completely, and we ran it for 30. I think we ran it for 38 hours, and then we ran out of steam because it was clear that we'd exhausted everything. And but in it, we got thousands of ideas, right? And we this is when it was like when it was a thing. We trended on Twitter, right? Like it was the hashtag Unijam was a trending hashtag on Twitter, and it was all quite novelty, but it was loads of energy, and you got stuff out of it which you just would not have got out of a normal strategic plan, because a strategic plan tends to be the senior management group go, what are we going to do? Well, we need to do this. What's our topic on? Like it's quite a dry process. In this one, there was the one of the most upvoted and most liked notions came out of a conversation about the creation of a graduation venue for UniSA, because UniSA didn't have a graduation hall. We used to rent the Festival Theatre or the Convention Centre, so you didn't graduate from the uni, you graduated from somewhere else, right? And we said, well, if we're going to build a graduation venue, well, we need a sports venue as well. So then it became, and we need a pool, right? And it became this big thing. And then Pridham Hall, that's what that is, right? So that came out, we went into that conversation. It was not on any capital development plan. It wasn't in any strategic plan. Everyone thought, actually, that's a great idea. It was Margaret Hicks, who used to run the student engagement unit. She came up with the idea, and it was perfect. Cost us a fortune, but it was perfect.
That's amazing. I love that. I love how you said you flattened the experience, so there was no hierarchy or power or anything like that, and true collaboration was able to come out of it. That's really cool.
And the tech, the jam tech, was really interesting because you could the hierarchy was the hierarchy of ideas, not individuals. So like Margaret's idea became one of these. You could see these networks of how the idea comes up, gets amplified, it gets bigger, and all the little satellite things that come off it. So we got these little kind of constellations of. You could see straight away where the great ideas were. It was so good.
Yeah, sounds like a really cool thing to be involved in as well.
It was exhausting.
Oh yeah, that too.
But it was good. It was good. And to be like as a new leader in a new organisation, we had jam parties in all the campuses. Everybody was online at the same time with these jam HQs that we went to various places to actually, there was like a dedicated place, but people were doing it all everywhere, right? And we had Unijam T-shirts. It became an event.
Yeah, sounds great. I'm a bit curious. Are there any leaders, past or present, or real or fiction, who have inspired you?
Fiction's always safe for them. I wrote a blog in 2013 called "What Would Captain Kirk Do?" I mean, and it's like I'm an unashamed. I like the notion that people can actually live in harmony and advance society, and kind of get over the whole, the stuff that causes wars, and go and explore. I think that's pretty cool. I like the way Captain Kirk went about doing his business. He's got some questionable 1960s shade on him, right? But by and large, it was about decisiveness. It was about empowering people. It was about backing in your crew and about taking them right from A to B. And I did this. I don't know. I did it with the LH Martin. I don't know where it went. I'll have to dig out my old laptops and see if I can find a copy of it. Because the one thing I didn't put into it, because like it was kind of, there were like 5 or 6 examples of how you do things, and one of them was about risk. Right? I remember the risk one sticks in my head because there's a great line in. It's in Star Trek Generations, right? This is going to be so bad. This, right? It's in Star Trek Generations, right? And I think about it quite frequently. So the old guard, which is Captain Kirk and Scotty and all these guys, they're retired, and there's a new Enterprise being launched, and they get invited to the launch of the new ship, and it's like kind of going back to the launch of a new university, right? But there's new people, right? There's a new VC and there's a new chief academic officer. There's all these new people who are doing the job that you used to do. So this is where Kirk is at in his mind, right? And they're on the bridge, and they're going to do this run around the block in the new spaceship. And the new captain, something goes wrong, right? And Captain Kirk is kind of itching to get into the chair to direct what's happening. He can't help himself. And the new captain is he's new to the game, and he's dithering around a bit. And Kirk says to him, "Risk is part of the game if you want to sit in the chair." And I think that's a pretty cool piece of advice about, you take informed risks, but if you want to be the boss, you have to take that kind of consequence. I like that. So that was in the blog. The one thing that wasn't in the blog was, and it's a known Kirk Star Trek leadership, I guess, solution, every now and again you blow up the enterprise, right?
Yeah, I feel like risk has come up a lot, I guess, in this conversation. I'm just a bit curious, like, how do you know when a risk is worth taking, or how to sort of approach those decisions?
I'm a pretty conservative person in my own kind of life, right? And I'm not I don't judge myself to take unnecessary risks in my professional life. I like to assess the consequence of a decision, right? So you can make a projection, like what if it went wrong, what would happen, right? And then you have boundaries around it in terms of, is it fiscal, is it reputational, are we going to have, like, is it going to impact on people's employment? You look at the risk profile of a decision, and you make it, and then you've got the tolerance you have for that eventuality, the probability it's going to actually pop out, and then how can you mitigate it, right? And if you can get to the point where you can go, well, if we do A, B, and C, and we make that decision, and the worst that could happen is D, and D on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 2, go ahead, right? So yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that I don't want for a better word, skill, you hone it over time. The more you do, the better you get at kind of forecasting and projecting, and that's where it's really important to triangulate decisions, because what I might see as a consequence might be different to what you'll see, or what you'll see, and having those inputs, which is, again, like having the ready room where the team is sitting around and having the conversation, just means you can make a better decision because you've kind of taken a 360 of the risk.
I want to go back to these blog posts because you reveal quite a lot in those blog posts, and we've enjoyed reading through them. And so I'm just thinking...
This is the big picture. Yeah?
It is the big picture. So in 2020, you posted, "Quiet achievers making a difference." You said that about how UniSA was basically coming into its own, quiet achievers making a difference. What would you say is sort of the mission statement for the new uni?
Somebody was talking about the little engine that could the other day, right? And I think that's it doesn't translate to my cultural background, but I think it resonates. It's actually quite a strong resonance in Australia and the US. And I get it, and I think that's not a bad metaphor. From right now, it's people who are going above and beyond, right? Like the level of work and effort that people are putting into trying to get things right is incredible, and we're asking a lot of people. We're not in the context of that blog. It's not a quiet achievement; it's huge, right? It's the biggest university merger in the history of higher education in Australia, and until somebody can show me numbers that says it's not, it's the biggest university merger in the world, right? That's pretty good, right? Yeah. It's a brand new institution, first one in the 21st century, and we're doing it, right? So I think we're people are really they're delivering, but we're asking a lot of them on the way through.
As the final Vice Chancellor of UniSA, what legacy are you hoping to leave?
I'm going to get a bronze plaque, put it on the wall, and say it was okay when I left it. No, I look. The joking aside, the legacy. This goes back to my mischievousness. The legacy piece, for me, I don't know how widely appreciated it is, and I don't know if everybody agrees with my read of it. Right? I think the most important thing in the context of the new university is the fact that the act of the new university is the University of South Australia Act. Right? And rightly or wrongly, I think that that's the constitution of the university is in its Foundation Act legislation. And people talked to me when I started here about the DNA of UniSA, and they talked about what was in the Act of UniSA and how what we did embodied those requirements and attributes that are there. They're all in the new uni, right? So, to my mind, in 50 years, in 100 years, because this will be an institution that will endure, right? So let's go forward 100 years. The Act will still be the Act, right? It's set up to do what's written in legislation from November of 2023, right? And that's the UniSA Act. If I look at the ranking that we got 2 weeks ago of 82, right, in the world, and that makes us number 8 of the young universities in the world, I couldn't get UniSA to that position as UniSA in that space of time. But the new Adelaide Uni, while it'll take on its own culture, its mission, its 5-year mission, its 10-year mission, is actually enshrined in that Act. And that's the legacy. That's the kind of the passing of the baton between this institution and what that institution will do. And it'll be good.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. Okay. Any likes?
Oh, yes. So, if you, well, you kind of do have a captain's log, which are your blog posts, but if you could have a captain's log summarizing maybe your most challenging day or week in your UniSA career, sort of what would it sound like and what would you say? And then on the flip side, what's maybe the best day or best week, or yeah, what are some highlights and lowlights? But take us through that.
The challenging stuff, when in COVID was difficult because we just didn't know what was going to happen, and we were fortunate in South Australia that we weren't as sequestered and locked down as other places. But as a uni, I remember getting the call. I remember getting a heads up actually that the Prime Minister was going to close the borders, and I remember thinking, and I thought to myself, "Oh, bugger this! This is not going to go well." And then I was in a meeting in Canberra where someone said, "Oh, you know, we've modelled what bird flu looked like, and no, it was H1N1, whatever that flu was, and this is the recovery curve, and this is what we think." And I remember thinking to myself, "Yeah, but you didn't close the borders, right? It's quite different." And it turned out to be quite different. And it was very different for universities because, you know, we, in the absence of international student income, universities are underfunded, right? And if you turn off the ability for students to engage, you've just taken away the ability to keep people in employment, right? So, and I made a decision, right, and the council backed it in, which was we were not going to let people go, right? That it was something that, you know, for now we could weather, and we could weather it if we needed to by going into a deficit, and we could use our reserves to sustain employment. And the rationale I had was twofold. One was I thought, you know, kind of panic slowly was one thing. And the other one was, if there is a return to normality, I won't have to boot up the whole place. It'll be there, right? And we had enough to do anyway because we had to go online. There was loads of things to do. So that was tricky. And I remember that there was one day. It was the infamous time of the pizza box, right? Mm-hmm. Up until that point, we'd not been closed, and I remember having to send people home that day, and that was hard, right? Because it was the first. Oh, here we go. Now we're all going home. It's not just work from home; it's go home, close the uni. So that was an interesting time, and a lot of stressors because you had not only the stressors of work, but you had the stressors of just there was a pandemic, right? So it was just bizarre. And for me, I was here, and all my family were in Ireland, right? So they had this kind of 2 years of not seeing people. So that was one part. That was probably the most kind of difficult period. Making some of the decisions we've had to make about the merger, and some of the things we've had to do in terms of just pragmatic compromises to make the thing work. They're not, if you had infinite time and infinite resource, they're not necessarily what you'd choose to do. But being pragmatic about being open, you have to make a choice, and they have consequences for lots of people. So they don't. I mean, they're not employment consequences because we've given everybody an employment guarantee, but they're ways of working consequences, and they wash through, and they're as simple as, you know, when you sit down and you look at two HR systems, which one is the newer system, right? And that's not something that when you're maintaining your HR system, you think, oh, I should get the new one just in case I emerge in 4 years' time and I'll have a newer one, and that's the one we'll use. It's just an accident, right? It's just the way the thing works. So, and then when you make that choice, well, what's connected to that HR system? And there's another 5 systems. And suddenly you've got a slew of things which are new to 50% of the people. And it would have been shoe on the other foot for the other institution had we made a different decision if we had had a newer thing. Right? They were tricky. That was a tricky decision because we had set about the notion of creating a best-in-breed system integration, and we ended up having to be a bit more pragmatic than I would have liked to have been. The good stuff, there's loads of good stuff. Like, and you don't tend to remember the old good stuff. I mean, Unijam was brilliant. There was a point when we hit the enrolment targets and we were the most industry engaged institution, which was all of the kind of the stuff we said we wanted to do in the strategic plans, which meant we got to where we were trying to get to, and I kind of thought, yeah, mission accomplished. We've done all of that. They were really good. Most recently, I mean, tomorrow we're going to announce the Indigenous name for Adelaide University, right? And that's a neat one because I was sitting in my office, we were drafting legislation, and it was just one of those kind of moments where I went, gosh, we could do that. And I ran up, and I was so fortuitous. There was a meeting of the elders upstairs. So I'm on level 4 on the Hawk, and in level 5, the elders were meeting, elders and residents, Uncle Lewis and the gang. And I went up the stairs, and I went into Lewis, and I said to him, I had an idea. I said, why don't we put provision for an Aboriginal name into the legislation? And he went, oh yeah, that's good. So I said, just get me a name, and tomorrow we announce the name. Right, and we're the first, with Adelaide University, the first Australian university to have provision in its legislation for an Aboriginal name, right? So I like that. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've achieved a lot in your career and it's all very exciting. I'm just curious, what advice would you give your younger self?
I don't know. I mean, it's like, I think you need to make the mistakes you make to end up where you end up. So, I mean, it's not like Back to the Future where I can go back and give myself the sporting almanac and just, maybe I'll do that. I tell myself what to put more money into lottery tickets, buy Google shares. There's lots of things you could do in that regard. So I don't tend to have that retrospective kind of regret intervention piece. I think you're the sum of your experiences, and some of them are good, some of them are bad.
I had just had this thought. The Enterprising Uni.
Yeah.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Star Trek Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I see. So what?
It's not subtle. It's not subtle at all.
Well, it just hit me, so maybe it is a bit subtle for non-Star Trek fans. But what? So obviously this is like a beloved media to you. What are other aspects of Star Trek that you have weaved into the uni?
No, I mean, the University of Enterprise piece was about, and it's Australia's University of Enterprise. So I was really deliberate that we would be differentiated. When I started, I got the impression that there was a risk that UniSA would try to be like every other university, right? And there's 38 other universities that you could be just like if you wanted to be like them. So, and I also got a feeling that if you let people kind of differentiate within guardrails, you'll get something interesting. So, UniSA had all this. I could see this kind of breadcrumbs of it. One of the taglines we used to have was experience, and I had a full stop. The difference. That was one of the marketing taglines from the 90s, and educating modern professionals. It was about engagement with industry. It just wasn't brought to the fore. Right? And the University of Enterprise moniker was on the back page of the first strategic plan. Right. So when I started, UniSA had a Horizon. I think it was Horizon 2020 was the name of the strategic plan that Peter had put in place before he left, and cheekily, I call our first strategic plan Crossing the Horizon, which is like kind of going a little bit further. Right? But on the back page of that, it said Australia's University of Enterprise, and that was we began to use it. And I didn't define it. Everyone drove people nuts. And it wasn't a Star Trek thing. It was about the fact that enterprise and innovation go hand in hand. And enterprise, I think we had a paragraph in there that says enterprise means different things to different people. That was either in the preamble to the plan or was it a preamble that I wrote to explain why I was going to have that words in it. And, for me, it conjures up all sorts of things about people making things and being better and, discovery and all those sorts of things. But a little bit of Star Trek in it, and which is kind of a team aligned to a mission. And the next strategic plan was Enterprise 25. Right? So it became, by the time we were in Enterprise 25, we owned the notion of being the University of Enterprise. So it's not, the Star Trek stuff doesn't really permeate into the institution, except if you can find one of my portraits as Vice Chancellor. Somewhere in the portrait, there is something to do with Star Trek.
Give another hint so we can source this.
That's it.
Yeah.
A year time frame?
Well, I only have 2, so there's 2 portraits, right?
Okay.
I don't have 13 of them. Yeah.
I thought maybe for every year.
Oh God, imagine that. No, 2. The older one. The one where I look. No, the one where I look older. So the newer portrait.
Okay.
It's a nice little Easter egg for everyone
Really
listening.
looking up that
Cool.
later.
And it is an Easter egg. It's put in as an Easter egg. Yeah. I tell you an Easter egg. Can I tell you an Easter egg story while we're at this? It's nothing to do with anything else. I was a million years ago involved in the production of a cartoon, right, an animated short of with Terry Pratchett, right, who's my favourite author. And Terry was involved with Trinity. And I asked Terry, could we adapt one of his short stories, because we had a student animation group who were doing some short movies. And he said, yeah. He said, just don't make me have to sue you. That was the deal we had. And then the story we wanted to adapt was set in a university. And this is another long story, I'm sorry. Right? It's set in a university, in the Unseen University. And I was thinking about how we could make the Trinity College Dublin Library part of the library of the Unseen University, which is to bring the two branches together. Right? And I got in touch with this guy, Stephen Player, who did those illustrations for the covers of Terry's books, based in the States, lives in New York. And I said to Stephen, we're going to do this thing, and there's one scene in this movie where a character's reading a book. Now, the most famous book in Ireland is in Trinity. It's the Book of Kells. It's a 9th century manuscript, and it's a lovely illustrated manuscript. And there's a character in Terry's book who's an orangutan, and he says ook. Oh, okay. So it's like you drop the B and you got the word. So we created the ook of Kells, right? Very funny if you're a Terry Pratchett fan. And so Stephen drew this wonderfully illustrated manuscripty page, which looked like a 9th century thing, which had an orangutan and had bananas and had bits of... And I said to him, Stephen, can you put in some Easter eggs for the fans? And then he came back and he literally drew in Easter eggs. Right? I was like, I thought I was talking like executive producer language, that he'd get it. I said, no, I mean characters from the book. And so that's my Easter egg story.
So I guess going back to the new university, what do you hope it will achieve for students and the broader South Australian community?
Yeah. I think the elevator pitch is by 2030, South Australia will have a top 5 university, right? And we'll have twice as many graduates from a top 5 university in the state of South Australia as an attractant from a human capital perspective to people who want to have a high caliber workforce, but also people who can go out and do smart things, right? So that's a good piece. And in doing what we did, from a student perspective, there's two pieces. One is we now have a DVC, Student Experience and Success, which was, again, one of those things where right at the very start, if you're going to be a big university, you need to pay attention to student experience. And the way to do that is to make sure it's at the top table. So you have a Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the top table whose gig is to be worried about student experience 24/7. And that's come to pass. And that's a pretty unique appointment. And it's a good one for generations of students. But the curriculum is brand new, right? It's the most contemporary curriculum in Australia. And with the Common Cores, when they get into kind of steady state, the ability for all students to access things which are actually mapped to employability and well-being and resilience, and as I said earlier on, kind of rounding them out as human beings, I think that's a great legacy. Now, if you were tinkering around the edges with an existing institution that just does what it does, you probably wouldn't get to that level of transformative change. But building a new one, blowing up the enterprise, you can.
And do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think one of the more interesting, you asked about things that you learn as a leader as you go through. One of the more interesting ones for me, and I've noticed I'm slightly better at it now, is to panic slowly. Right? I think people react and they kind of go, and then they blow up. The ability to kind of react and then park the reaction and then step back in again and just think, is that the right reaction to that? Or is there something else I need to think about? If you can have that level of just that kind of presence in reflection, I think it makes a huge difference. And it's a more experienced senior manager than I used to use that phrase a lot. Panic slowly. But particularly when you're faced with an onslaught of stuff, it's not a bad skill to try and develop.
I was just thinking while you were talking about the student experience and that kind of thing. UniSA does have this reputation of having the most student, what's the word? Satisfaction rates, post-graduation, we just did a leadership summit event where we were with around 60 students for 2 days, and there really is this community within UniSA students that they love this campus, this community, and so you're obviously been a part of that, and I've been a part of nurturing that community. So we just wanted to thank you for being part of that.
Well, you're welcome.
You create a very welcoming university that I think has very strong roots and that it will continue forward like that.
I hope so. I mean, yesterday Peter and I were talking to the Australian about the new uni, and we made the point because we got to the stage now where we're nearly finishing each other's sentences, but we got to the point where we were talking about one of the unusual characteristics of the new university is its span of presentation to market, right? So you have, I mean, Peter was first in the family to go to uni, so was I, so are all of my leadership team here, and 3/4, if not more, I'd say 80% of the leadership team of the new university are all people who were first in the family to go to uni, right? And that kind of gets you to a position where you try not to be too stuffy in the way in which you present the market. But when you've got a lot of sandstone and established and 150-year-old pedigree kind of buildings in the context of Australia and South Australia, you have a kind of a architectural stuffiness in the way in which you present. But now, if you think about the new university, and when we do the open day next week, if you go from Samry to the Botanic Gardens, that's the campus, right? And you've got the full spectrum of presentation to market about kind of new, old, open, traditional. There's not many universities have that. And that, I think, means that anybody who's thinking about university with the right culture in place to accept them and welcome them. And that's where the attainment model is really important in the way we've architected the curriculum, because I think student experience starts in the classroom, right? But all of those bits kind of mean that you should be able to see yourself in the institution, no matter kind of which door you come through. So I think that's that. So it's a good blend. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's next for you?
What's next for me? I'm going on honeymoon after I step down as co-VC, and then I have to close UniSA on the 31st of March, and then I'm going to take a rest.
Lovely.
I did just have one more to ask. Sorry. So live long and prosper.
Mm-hmm.
What does long and prosperous look like for you personally?
I'd like to not have a heart attack in the next 5 years. That'd be good. Look, I mean, prosperous is about just feeling like you don't wake up with existential dread, right? You're not perpetually worried. And to live in a worry-free position it's a great goal and aspiration for anybody to have. And you just, I mean, to be comfortable is great. I'd like to just be around long enough to enjoy it, right? And the stressful jobs, and you think, and weird things happen to people all the time. I mean, and one of the things about like being a leader, last week, bizarrely, we had 2 staff members pass away, like in the space of 2 days, and both younger than, well, one younger than me and one not that far away from my age. And you kind of think, well, things happen all the time. So living long and prosper, the younger you are, the further away long seems, right? The older you get, the more you just want to keep going, right? So living long and prosper would be, I could get up and not worry, and I'd be happy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great to chat with you and hear all about your story. So, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.